Good afternoon, everybody. Please come in, find a seat. I'd like to ask Rabbi Sandy to come up and open the ark. I'm not going to tell you ahead of time. Say a few prayers for us, maybe a poem. Or a story, of course, yeah. We'll say that for the family service. Well, thank you all for joining this, for this more unique and different Yom Kippur afternoon conversation. We've had a lot of great conversations on Yom Kippur afternoons with a lot of different outside speakers, but today we get a little inside baseball opportunity, get a little extra information. And we have Rebecca Geyer, who is not only president of our congregation, she's now president of our foundation. So she just keeps working for our congregation and does many other things at the request of the board and with her wonderful legal skills. So really appreciate Rebecca and all your work, and then especially preparing this because you have two very difficult subjects to work with here. Lots of information to go through.
No material at all.
Yeah, no material.
She says that after she finishes with the foundation, she's applying for the rabbi job.
Well, I think she'd be a great rabbi, but for all of you that don't know, Rebecca also has an incredibly gorgeous voice. So I was standing next to her when she was saying the blessings, and I went, wow, that's a really beautiful voice. So maybe she can be the assistant cantor and assistant rabbi, so you can do both roles.
In all my spare time.
In all her spare time. And she also does a lot of volunteering in the legal field. Really a wonderful member of our community, a wonderful volunteer, and a wonderful leader. And she was the first president when I came on the board that I worked under, and set a great example on how to efficiently operate a board and include the board members. So thank you, Rebecca. We're really excited for all the material you have sourced here to get some good information from our rabbis. And of course, very quickly, I'd like to introduce you to these new people here, Rabbi Dennis and Rabbi Sandy. I have a lot of history with both of them. As Rabbi Dennis had mentioned, I think on Rosh Hashanah we used to go apple picking together as families. I think we still have some pictures back when I had hair and my dad had hair, so you know how long ago that was. I was just a child when we were apple picking together. I think you need no further introduction, so we'll let Rebecca take over, and I'll just ask all the audience to think about questions you might have. There will be a period of time at the end for Q&A, and Rob Kirsch, one of the officers on the board, and I will move around with the microphones and get your questions. So any question you want, there is nothing off limits, right? All questions for the rabbis you want. Yeah. Ari and Levi, that includes you guys, so think of some good questions. All right, I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Thank you. Well, I have to say from the outset that it was very kind of you to ask me to moderate today. I don't often like to admit my own age, but I will, for purposes of this discussion, say I was just shy of 3 when you became the rabbis at Congregation Beth-El. So for me, you have been the only rabbis truly that I have known, other than our associate rabbis the last few years. So it's an honor and a privilege to be here today. So as you might have expected, I have prepared a few questions to kick off this afternoon's presentation. I know we called this your 5 generations here at Beth-El, but I thought actually I would start a little bit earlier than that. And so the first question I have for each of you, I should say, is you come originally from different backgrounds. Dennis is from Panama, as you're probably all aware, and grew up in a Sephardic tradition. Rabbi Sandy is from Philadelphia and grew up in an Ashkenazi tradition. And then you both decided at some point to become rabbis. So my first question is, can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to become rabbis? And was it the same for both of you, or what was different?
Go ahead, Dennis. You start.
Well, let me just begin by...
Let the older person start.
Right. I'm trying to have a comeback that wouldn't be misunderstood. Let me just say how delighted we are that Rebecca is having this conversation with us, because as she indicated, our memories of her and the Gold family go back very, very early. Rebecca was a star. She was very bright when she was 3 years old, but she was then one of our star high school students, confirmands. The family traveled with us to Israel during one of our early congregational Israel trips, and she even served as a babysitter for David and Debbie. We were neighbors. We lived in Williston Green. Now, David would say to Rebecca when she came, "You're babysitting my sister, not me," because there was a shorter age gap there at the time. But we're not only grateful to you, we admire you, and we are grateful for all that you have done for the congregation over the years. Okay, the question is,
What made each of you decide to become rabbis, and was it the same for both of you, or what was different?
I decided to become a rabbi formally from the time that I became bar mitzvah. I had even thought about it before, but something during the preparation and the event told me that this is what I wanted to do. I grew up in a small congregation, first in the city of Colon, Panama, which is on the Atlantic side. My great-grandparents were the lay hazanim of that congregation, and I grew up in a home that was very Jewishly committed, though in no way could you describe it as Orthodox or even traditional. We were pretty comfortable and easy with our Judaism, which was a very definite identity and part of who we are. In Panama, Sephardic Jews, because of the fact that we were Spanish-speaking to begin with, were very much integrated into the general society. There was very little of a social, cultural difference. But I decided when I became bar mitzvah, and already we were in the city of Panama, and I was now attending a Jewish day school from 7th grade on, that this is what I loved to learn about, this is what I wanted to do, and this is what I was going to be. I didn't know how that would happen. It eventually developed. I had applied to the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati upon graduation from high school because they had a program with the University of Cincinnati where you would start at the University of Cincinnati and then you would move in after your bachelor's degree into the rabbinical program, and it was a shorter program that way. It would have been a total of 8 years, including undergraduate. But I had the good fortune of being accepted to Brandeis University with a scholarship upon graduation from high school in Panama. And there, things went full throttle because I majored in Jewish studies and was influenced by some of the great scholarly minds in Jewish studies at Brandeis University. I even considered for a while that perhaps I didn't want to be a congregational rabbi, but I wanted to go into Jewish academics, into biblical scholarship. But at the end of the day, having spent a year in Israel and having developed a strong sense of Jewish peoplehood and community, I said, I want to work with the Jewish people, with the Jewish community. And that then led to my application once again to the Reform Seminary and to the newly opened Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. And I was accepted there, and I decided after interviews that this was the place for me. I had already begun to think in Reconstructionist terms of my Jewish identity, and that's where I ended up. And that leads to this chapter.
Well, our journey was different. Our thanks to you is the same, however, because I remember Rebecca used to sing in family services for me often, because as you know, my voice leaves a little bit to be desired, and I used to find the most talented and beautiful voices among our youth, and Rebecca was one. So I decided to become a rabbi when I was a little older than Dennis. I was 16. and I was in my confirmation class, and I was in a large Reform congregation in Philadelphia.
I have to say, Rabbi Sandy, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was actually amazed. I read something about Rabbi Sandy's confirmation class. She had 120 people in her confirmation class.
Yes, I had 120 students, and we each had a part in the service. Oh, yeah, so you know what happens. But boy, have times changed. I was very active in my youth group. I was actually involved in NIFTY at the time. I went to Israel on a NIFTY trip when I was in 10th grade, and that really impacted me greatly. But the truth is, the confirmation service just blew me away. I don't know how to describe it. I remember coming home that evening and thinking, okay, there's nothing else I want to do than be a rabbi. Now, that might sound fairly normal for a guy, but there were no women rabbis. And, well, as you well know, I was the first woman from my seminary, only the second in the United States, and the third in the world. A woman was ordained, which I did not know at that time, in Germany before World War II. But this passion stayed with me for a very long time, but I doubted it. I was not a rebellious teenager. Just want you to know that, guys. No rebellion. I was not a rebellious teenager, and so I thought, who was I to go against, thousands of years of tradition? But no matter what I did and what I studied, I was going to go into academics and Judaism, comparative religion. It kept coming back to me, and I was asked to help lead a service at my congregation in Philadelphia, which was Knesset Israel, in my senior year of college. And when I got up and led the service and I finished, I said, oh my God, I have to do this. And my rabbi then, Rabbi Bertram Korn, who helped install us, helped me process getting into rabbinical school. I said, I'm not waiting. I know it's already April and people have applied, but I want to get in for September. And I applied to the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and the rest is history. I mean, I met just some funny things. I also applied to the University of Cincinnati to go for the 8-year program. And I was accepted, but I ended up staying in Philadelphia, and I went to Temple University. So there was a place for us to meet. I considered applying to Hebrew Union College also, but I didn't, although Dennis did. However, the Rabbi Korn, who was advising me, said, I think you should apply to the Reconstructionist College because they have a dual program and you can get an advanced degree along with your rabbinic degree. And he says, we don't know if people will accept women in the rabbinate. So I advise you to go to this program because if you're not accepted, then you could go on with an academic career. So I had already read a lot of Mordecai Kaplan. I was very sympathetic to Reconstructionists. And that's what happened. You want to know how we first met?
Of course.
So this was actually a rather funny story. We were both going to be teaching at Knesset Israel in Sunday school. And I got a call a few days before the first Sunday school session from the principal of the school. They said, well, there's another rabbinical student who can't come on time. He's in Panama. He's very ill. And he will miss. Can you conduct his creative liturgy class? And I'm going, oh, come on, he's not ill. He's probably on vacation. He's on vacation, doesn't kind of come back, and he's going to, I can't conduct his creative liturgy class. I don't play guitar. I'm sure he plays guitar, wears sandals, and cut-off jeans. And then Dennis comes. He's never worn sandals in his life. And he doesn't play guitar. So it was quite a shock, and that was the first time we met in the synagogue, even before rabbinical school started.
I thought you met at rabbinical school.
Well, that continued.
Continued. All right. Well, you touched a little bit on this when you each gave your previous answer, but I want to tell us more about your decision to embrace Reconstructionism and attend Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. What drew each of you to Reconstructionism?
Wait, this is a dangerous question to ask Dennis. Usually when we're at a dinner and somebody says, "What is Reconstructionism?" I go, "Oh my God." So I'll let him answer, but I'm going to say this is the
I'll put a timer on it.
Elevator version.
Like many people who discover Reconstructionism as a viable expression of Judaism for them, I came to it already feeling that I was it. That is, the more I read about Kaplan, Milton Steinberg, the first rabbi of this congregation, Ira Eisenstein, the more I realized that this is the most cogent, coherent, intellectually and spiritually appropriate expression of Judaism for me. Reconstructionism embraces Judaism as the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. It is not just a faith tradition, it is a culture, and it is grounded on the experience of the shared peoplehood of our ancestry and contemporary relationships. Judaism, Reconstructionist Judaism, is a natural way of being Jewish. I spoke about non-supernaturalism during my service, during my sermon last night. By that, Reconstructionism simply means that we don't rely on the miraculous, that we don't rely on the suspension of the norms of reason to affirm our Judaism. Judaism is not what God reveals supernaturally to the people of Israel, but what the people of Israel, in their quest for the godly life, for sacred values, create. And it is an experience of responsibility. It is not authoritarian. It springs from the community and a sense that who we are is, in fact, the best way in which we can contribute to the broader expression of humanity. So for me, being a Reconstructionist is simply a natural, comfortable, intelligible, reasonable, spiritually appropriate way of coming to my religious experience.
So I guess I had always been a Reconstructionist, but didn't know it, as many people say they are Reconstructionists, but didn't know it until we explained it to them. The first book I read about Reconstructionism was in my confirmation class. This was a powerful year for me. I read As a Driven Leaf by Milton Steinberg. And so I started fairly early on in appreciating the perspective of Reconstructionism. I should say, I also read another book in my confirmation class, which was I and Thou by Martin Buber. And you would say, how unusual for a 16-year-old to read the philosophy of Martin Buber. And the only reason I did that is I had an assignment to write a book report for my Sunday school class. And I went into the library and looked for the thinnest book. And it happened to be I and Thou, and that influenced me as well. But for the very same reasons Dennis has articulated, I wanted a Judaism that was intellectually credible. And I really felt Reconstructionism made the most sense to me. I couldn't accept a view of a supernatural God who was up there rewarding and punishing, and Reconstructionism provided me a way to talk about God that made sense to me. And I also wanted Judaism was aesthetically pleasing. And I was enamored by many of the rituals and traditions. And I just wanted to feel that I had the capacity to continue to see those traditions evolve in ways that were aesthetic and meaningful for our generation. So I would say both things, intellectual credibility and a certain aesthetic for appreciating the evolving tradition and how we could add our own voices to the voices of our ancestors.
I'm trying to decide if I want to jump around because you gave me a perfect segue. I guess I will do that. Well, let me back up just a second because you touched on a few things. Rabbi Dennis, you mentioned that Rabbi Steinberg was here. So Reconstructionism was actually kind of part of the ideology of Beth-El Zedeck long before you got here, but it certainly became more of an identity for our congregation once the two of you assumed the pulpit. What types of feedback did you receive from congregants when you arrived here at Beth-El Zedeck?
That's an interesting and long question, but I will try to keep it brief. Yes, Reconstructionism was foundational to the makeup of this congregation, but it was so in quieter ways. Not that we made a lot of noise, I don't think so, but Rabbi Milton Steinberg, who came to serve Beth-El in 1927, was the lead disciple of Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. And he was a brilliant mind, and Beth-El Zedeck brought with him to Indianapolis the beginnings of what would become a very special congregation. Let me say this. You don't know how unique and how special you are as a congregation in the United States. And I don't say that because of our tenure. I say that because of our history. This is a congregation who has always been on the forefront of innovation in the conservative movement, because this was a congregation that was affiliated with the conservative movement, because Kaplan and Steinberg and Eisenstein were conservative trained rabbis. They represented the more modernistic trend in the conservative movement. So the minute that Rabbi Steinberg came here, he began to introduce innovations, inclusion of women, confirmation class, working with young families, renovating the liturgy. I mean, till this day we use, I'm going to read at Ne'ilah, a prayer that Rabbi Milton Steinberg wrote for the Ne'ilah service. He was at the forefront of innovation in American Judaism. Then he was succeeded by a few others, but most eminently by Rabbi Bill Greenfeld, William Greenfeld. William Greenfeld was a president of the Conservative Rabbinical Assembly. He was a staunch disciple of Mordecai Kaplan, and he was a brilliant mind who brought the best of world culture, and Alan Goldstein tells me that he was a scholar of Shakespeare, and that he would blend world culture with Judaism, and that is part of the Reconstructionist ethos. Judaism is not something here, and the world is here. As a Reconstructionist, you live your Judaism in the context of the broader civilization of which you are part. Kaplan speaks about living in two civilizations that share common values. So the difference with our arrival is that until we came here, there had been no graduates of a Reconstructionist seminary to serve the congregation. But all the previous rabbis who had served Beth-El Zedeck were Reconstructionist-minded rabbis. And they brought the spirit, the ethos, the innovative spirit, the egalitarian spirit of the movement to the congregation in ways that were unique to this synagogue, distinct from other congregations in the conservative movement. When our kids, Debbie and David, were in USY, some of the more conservative congregations that would come to have kinusim and gatherings here were blown away by some of the things that women did at Beth-El Zedeck. Janie, you would probably remember that, right? You were involved in USY, and the other congregations could not believe that girls could do certain things at Beth-El Zedeck.
Can I just interrupt you? No, because there's a funny story. I just want to... when, I don't know if it was David or Debbie, was religious vice president or something at the synagogue, David had a list of people to have the aliyahs for the U.S.-wide convention. And the overall religious vice president of U.S.-wide, not the regional one, said, oh, don't ask any girls for aliyot. And David, I think it was, said, oh, but the rabbis won't like that. And the regional vice president said, don't tell the rabbis. Okay.
So I think that that's the difference. That until we came here, the Reconstructionism was kind of a just accepted norm of what the synagogue was about. Our presence as graduates of the college made now this more evident. And just a little side story that some of you may or may not remember, and here Alan Goldstein plays a role. About 7 years into our rabbinate here, there was a contingent in the congregation, a certain constituency, that were not happy with some of the innovations that we were beginning to introduce, and they wanted a more conservative approach. So they approached the board and they said that our election to the rabbinate here should be reconsidered because we were not graduates of the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is the seminary of the conservative movement. Right? Yes. So there was a meeting in the auditorium when it wasn't so pretty as it is right now, before beautification. And at that meeting, about 100 and some people came out, some to defend the Sassos and some to demote the Sassos. And Alan Goldstein held the day and explained very carefully, very clearly, that in fact Reconstructionism was in the very spirit of the conservative movement, and that all the great Reconstructionist thinkers had been, in fact, conservative leaders, from our first rabbi, Milton Steinberg, to Bill Greenfeld, to Mordecai Kaplan, who was the pillar of the seminary, and that Reconstructionism then was very much an expression of conservative Judaism in its unfolding in the United States. There are several congregations in the country now that hold dual affiliation with conservative and Reconstructionist Judaism. Reconstructionism became kind of an umbrella ideology for many Jews in the United States because of its focus on peoplehood. I don't know if you're aware, Reconstructionism established the bat mitzvah in America. It gave way to the concept of the Jewish Community Center. It was a Kaplan notion of the organic Jewish community. That's what he called it. Jews should constitute an organic community where people from different religious expressions can come together, work together, and build unity on the principle of peoplehood.
Well, I don't have a lot to add, except that I remember there was a pamphlet that we were given when we came here that Rabbi Steinman had prepared, and they asked us, would we like, to use this? And we opened it up, and it was straight out of the Reconstructionist prayer book. But the congregation never knew that. They thought it was just part of the conservative prayer book, but Rabbi Steinman had been leading those prayers for years. And we also met Rabbi Sidney Steinman at a Reconstructionist Federation convention before we even knew where Indiana was. So there was a very long history of Reconstructionist connection to this congregation in many, many, many ways. I won't say more. I think that should do it.
Well, I do want to talk a little bit about your arrival in Indianapolis. I feel like in all my years as a Hoosier, we haven't often been known as a pretty progressive state, but our congregation was pretty progressive in bringing the two of you here as fairly new rabbis, and you, Sandy, certainly as the first ordained woman rabbi from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and only the second ordained rabbi ever. Tell me a little bit about what you think your Rabbinate here in Indiana has provided you in terms of opportunities that you might not have experienced out on the East Coast?
Wow, we were lucky to come here, but we didn't know it when we first got in the car to drive here. When Dennis says, what would you think about going to a congregation in Indiana? I said, where? Where is that exactly?
Failed geography.
I'm sorry. We tell this story all the time, but when we were driving here in the car, once we were coming to serve as rabbis after we were accepted by the congregation, we were getting closer, and it was Indiana radio, and they were giving the soybean and hog report. And I said, Dennis, where are we going? And it took a little while to be acclimated, but I have to say, this congregation had courage to accept us. Maybe less so Dennis, but we were very young. I mean, we were 3 years out of rabbinical school, and you were a well-established congregation with extraordinary rabbis in your history. And I was a woman. I mean, I even said to Dennis, I'm not so sure if I have opposition in New York, which I did, how coming to the Midwest, the Bible Belt, are they going to accept me as a woman? So I don't know what you all were talking about in the
Hey, Ed Gabovich is here. We can ask him about the secret conversations in the board of directors.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have no idea what you were talking about in the pews, to say, but everybody was so nice. I mean, I said, when I talk about who's your hospitality, that's what I think of. People seem to accept us and me as a woman. Now, I heard behind the scenes, some people were saying things, but nobody ever said it to my face. Except as the one time that someone, a couple was getting married, and the father of the bride said, I don't want a pregnant rabbi officiating at the ceremony. And I was pregnant with Debbie at the time. So I says, I don't know why it should bother you as long as the bride isn't pregnant. And but I hope that person isn't here right now. No. But there were lots of stories like that. But I would say that we were accepted, and in terms of what it meant to be here for our rabbinate, the opportunities that presented themselves in a smaller city, had been in New York, I grew up in Philadelphia, were enormous. I mean, our entree into civic life here has been a great love of ours. And I mean, the first couple of weeks we were here, we met the mayor. We had lunch with the mayor. I mean, it was extraordinary, the opportunities we had to get involved in the political life of the city and the civic life of the city, which has meant the world to us, because part of the way in which we think about Judaism is to enrich the Jewish life of the congregation, but doing that also requires you to go outside the congregation, because that's our call as Jews. That's what we read in the book of Isaiah for our Haftorah that Alan chanted so beautifully today. So that was just incredible. I could never imagine doing that somewhere else. And it continues even in my retirement to be a really important part of my life.
Well, I will continue down that frame then. Because you two have always been wonderful role models of civic engagement and really interfaith dialogue. I remember as a kid, when the first Gulf War broke out, you participating in things with Muslim individuals and lots of things within the community with people of different faiths so that we could better understand the Gulf War. But that is just one of a small number of things that you have done within the civic and interfaith communities. What values of Judaism do you think you've tried to express to the community at large? And I also wondered, what do you hold dear as values you learned from leaders of other faiths?
I have discovered that in learning about other faiths and in dialogue with people from other faith traditions, not only do I broaden my understanding of their faith tradition and their culture, but I begin to deepen my self-understanding and my understanding of Judaism, because ultimately there is a common core to religion, and there is diversity. Religions are like languages. They're different ways of expressing who we are, what we want, what we need, and where we want to go. Languages have different grammars. They have different vocabularies. They have different cadences. But all in all, they are means of communication. And religion, at its best, is a way of communicating, not just with God, as the ancients would have it, but with one another. Religion, in its best expression, is the vocabulary that keeps us connected and understanding of one another. So I would think that the core value is a word that we use and don't pay sufficient attention to. It is shalom. The word shalom means peace, but it means more than peace in the sense of the absence of conflict or the absence of war. It comes from the word that means in Hebrew wholeness, shalem, shleimut, completeness. So I think that if we think, and this is an important Reconstructionist value, Mordecai Kaplan and the Reconstructionist movement disavow the notion of being the chosen people. We are a people who chooses. We are not a people who have been chosen. And as a choosing people, we have to make decisions. We have to make choices as to what are the important things. What is the uniqueness that brings us together, and what is that we can share with others, and what is that we can learn from others. An enriching component of my trajectory here in Indianapolis was my work at Christian Theological Seminary, where I have taught for 3 decades, and where I finally obtained my doctorate. So it has been a very important component.
So I had also been involved with CTS, Christian Theological Seminary, for a number of years, and too got my doctorate from there, but it was a great experience. I would say, Dennis said the word shalom, but what I've learned from interacting in interfaith community is to reclaim the word chesed, the word which is translated as grace. And that for so long, I think Judaism had said, well, grace, that's Christian. And it's not. I mean, we came up with grace first, but I never really appreciated that term, chesed, covenantal love, grace, compassion. They were very integral to Judaism, and by hearing Christian colleagues particularly talk about it, I came to reclaim my own. In addition, when I retired from Beth-El Tzedek as rabbi, I started a program which many of you know about already, and we have some artists here who are in the program, Religion, Spirituality, and the Arts, which is now at IUPUI and coming into its 10th year. And it was a way to bring people of many different faiths who were creative in the arts, either as poets or visual artists or musicians, to study a single biblical text through the eyes of all those disciplines. And in hearing people from different faiths come to appreciate this text and offer their insight and their perspective really enriched my own, to the point that I repeat some of their creative ideas because they brought fresh eyes to the text. And you said, what value? I mean, the verse that comes to mind of a value that I think is important to share with the community is the verse from Micah, to do justice. God has asked you, what is required of you? Only to do justice, to love mercy, and walk humbly with God. So that justice and compassion and humility are the qualities, I think, that are inherent in Judaism that requires us to go out into the world.
And I'll piggyback, can I say that? On that, the same Micah has the verse, which I think is the epitome of diversity and affirmation of differences in our biblical tradition. You're all familiar with the verse that begins, "It shall come to pass in the end of days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established at the top, and all the people shall come and say, 'Come, let us go to Jerusalem,' and so forth." And here, Judaism celebrates its uniqueness. It's about the end times. It's about the time of cooperation, of peace. There will be peace for Jerusalem. And the passage appears both in Isaiah and in Micah. But Micah adds a verse at the end. Micah says, "In that time, all the peoples shall walk in the names of their God, as we walk in the name of the eternal our God." So in Judaism, understanding cooperation does not mean homogeneity. It means the affirmation of difference and the commitment to work together.
Well, I want to turn our attention now. Obviously, in the years that you've been here, our congregation has changed a lot. I was trying to remember highlights of things over the years that I have been a member here and just how much has changed. The look of our synagogue has changed. Music has changed. Our prayer books at times have changed. We have an early childhood program that didn't exist before you arrived here. And you talked about Reconstructionism also allowing you to evolve with the change of the times. So I want to know what, I guess, changes or things, whether it be rituals or prayers or developments here in the congregation, you are most proud of during your tenure here at Beth-El Zedek.
Well, I guess the first one I will say is the early childhood program. So you don't realize that not everybody on the board wanted that to happen a long time ago. When Debbie was 2 years old, and I was dragging her along with David to take violin lessons at Fairview Presbyterian Church, as we were waiting in the hall, I kept seeing signs. Mother's Day Out program, Mother's Day Out program. And I said, why don't we have that? Now, synagogues didn't have any early childhood programs at that time. Now, and I said, well, we need to have a Mother's Day Out, which of course changed to Parents' Day Out to early childhood program. And when we brought it up to the board, there was some hesitancy. Well, need more custodial work, we're not quite sure, destroyed the building, you don't know what kids can do. And I said, yeah, let's just try it for a year. How bad could it be? And we started with 8 students. Debbie was one, Adam Waldman was another. I think Fogel is, and I'm trying to remember all 8 students. Oh, Zucker, that's true, I forgot. All 8 students who are now all grown up, and look what we have. We have an incredible early childhood program. And it was an idea we brought, but also a risk that the congregation took. They took a risk in hiring us, they took a risk in starting this program. It has been one of the premier programs for young children in this city. I mean, it's talk about interfaith. There's a lot of interfaith that goes on in that program. And so I'm really proud of that. And I'll mention one other thing. I know Dennis will say more, but when I came, you were not all that sensitive to feminism. I didn't want to lay it on thick because I didn't want you to oppose me right away. I didn't talk about women for 10 years when I came here. I said, I'm not going to lay it on. I don't want anybody, I'm going to just, do my thing as a rabbi. But, the language of the prayers was not particularly inclusive. And I was trying, and I'll tell you one other thing. And during B'nai Mitzvah, you probably don't even realize this, that the bat mitzvah would say the candle blessing, and the bar mitzvah would chant the kiddush. And I go, why? I mean, what's wrong with the girl saying the kiddush? It's the longer prayer. How come she gets the short prayer? And so we changed, and we said, they'll do both. What's wrong with that? They'll do both. And at the beginning, many people said, I'll say the candle blessing for my son. It's okay if my daughter says the kiddush, but I'm not so sure I want my son to say the candle blessing. But guess what? You don't even think twice about that anymore. They say both, and it's normal. So the incorporation of more opportunities for women, our sisterhood, everybody reads Torah and chants Haftorah. It's absolutely incredible, the opportunities this congregation has created. It is by far the premier conservative congregation in this light. So that gives me much pride.
There were several liturgical and practical changes that were introduced, and they were done slowly and with the consent of the congregation. We never felt that certain things should be just done because the rabbis say so. We wanted, of course, buy-in so that people would participate. I don't know how many of you remember that when we first came here, and for about, perhaps 10 years, the Friday night service was at 8:15. And it lasted for an hour and 15 minutes at least, sometimes an hour and a half. And then people would gather for oneg at 10 o'clock, and they would get home at 11 o'clock. And I had to do services the next day. And I had to give a sermon. The rabbis gave a 25-minute sermon every Friday evening, classical sermon, longer than what we sometimes give for the high holy days now. So one of the things that we did as we saw attendance diminishing, and it was happening across the country, is proposed to the board that we need to have an early Friday evening Shabbat service. Tremendous amount of opposition from some. Others welcomed it. And so the approach was, let's try it for a couple of months and see how it goes. And we tried it, and people liked it. And for the past 30 years or so, Beth-El has had a 6 o'clock Friday evening service, which allows for people to go back home after bar mitzvah and celebrate and so forth and so on. So that was one thing. Another, perhaps you don't remember, when we came to Beth-El, there used to be a 2-day observance of the pilgrim holidays. Pesach, an additional day observance of Passover. Passover was 8 days. Shavuot was 2 days. And Sukkot was 9 days, what is called the additional day of the diaspora. And the problem with that is that people wouldn't show up for the extra day. And in fact, they would miss the important service, which was the Yizkor service, which was on the additional day. So we
No, they would miss the first service. Okay, forget it. They would come for Yizkor, but they wouldn't come for
Okay,
Simchat
so
Torah.
the synagogue was empty for Simchat Torah. So one of the things is we want to revive Simchat Torah in this congregation, which was a dull event when we came. So, and Purim. So we revived Simchat Torah, we had Purim, we made Purim a big costume bash with children, and then Simchat Torah, we took out the Torah, we opened the Torah. Our focus was get the parents through the kids. And we began then to focus on that dimension of experience. Another change was, I said the second day of the holiday, Simchat Torah, there was one more thing that I wanted to mention, and what was that? Oh, yeah.
Baby namings, also a change.
I'm sorry?
Baby namings. For
Baby
girls.
namings. We started introducing baby namings for girls, which were generally just done with a Misha Beirach on Saturday morning or during the minyan for the children. So our focus at the beginning, because we were parents, young parents at that time, was bring back families, bring back youth to the synagogue. And that way, I think that we created a spirit of revival to some degree. Things ebb and flow, and every generation or every half a generation has to look at the situation, what is needed now. And that's what we mean by Judaism being evolving. Nothing is written in stone.
Since you mentioned children, I want to say something. I mean, we used to have our children's like second day family service and children's family services in the chapel. We got too big. We couldn't fit in there any longer. I mean, creating family worship was something very dear to me that I worked on really hard. I worked on learning how to be a storyteller, and thank you, because that's helped me write children's books. But we had a really robust family service that I hope we can recapture, although I know generations are different and things are different, but it was a very powerful experience. The other thing I pointed to Dennis, and we were both going to say this bima did not look like this. If you remember, it was all built up, and there were no stairs, and you could only come up way on the side there, and it was and there was a fence separating the congregation. One of the things we felt very strongly about was, we want to be together. This is a community, This isn't a stage. I don't need to be separate from you. I want to be with you. And we wanted to bring, the leadership and the rabbis and the cantor closer to the congregation, and we wanted the congregation closer to us. And that took a lot of work to reconfigure this bima. And you may remember, too, we always wore robes when we came. Yes. We wore robes for every service. I insisted we maintain that until I finished being pregnant, but because, by the way, it was the best maternity dress. But after that, we kept slowly. Remember, we only wore them for B'nai Mitzvah, and then we didn't wear them elsewhere. And then slowly but surely, we did away with the robes, because that felt very unlike ourselves, too separate. Except for high holidays, where there is a sense of elevation that the robes were worn. But it was a way of making the congregation feel more connected, warmer, closer as a community.
Well, we've talked about all the things that you were able to implement. I'm wondering if there are things that you wanted to implement here at Beth-El Zedek, but you either weren't able to, or you had opposition to doing so.
We would have loved to have seen 500 people at Friday evening and Shabbat morning services, but we face some opposition there for some reason. Look, the climate of society, the climate of American Judaism goes through ebbs and flows and fluctuations, and the things that one is able to do 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, are not the things that my colleagues in the future will be having to deal with. There will be new challenges, new opportunities, new successes. I would have wanted to see I don't know. I'm pretty satisfied. I can't tell you that there have not been issues and conflicts, but they have always been resolved. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more. And again, I was very careful here because I respected the dual identity of the congregation. There are certain things in the liturgy that, to this day, I find difficult for me as a rabbi. I would have loved to see the congregation come to a to a recitation of blessings that do not affirm the chosenness of the people of Israel. But that's the liturgy. It's a mantra. People say words that they often do not even think about as they are saying them. But that's a trade-off, and I respect everybody's right. In fact, if they are thinking and comfortable with what they're saying, to say and to do precisely that. So my theology, my way of thinking about God and Judaism and history, makes room for other people's theology, and what we want is for people to have that work both ways.
I'll add one thing, and I don't know why, and I'm sure it's just the climate and how things have happened with kids' involvements in so many extracurricular activities. I wish we could have had, and we could have created a more vibrant youth group. We did many things, and we had youth. I mean, we had more youth up here on the pulpit over our years than ever before. I mean, the martyrology, that's actually something that we did that really I'm very proud of, to see a younger generation, kids reading Torah, carrying on this tradition. That, I think that has been very successful. But the extracurricular activities, it's just so hard now, and it's hard to say what the reason is. I mean, kids are like, oh my God, there's hardly an afternoon that they're not engaged in some kind of sports or other activity. So I wish there was a way that we could bring youth together again, and like my youth group. My God, without my youth group, I wouldn't have been a rabbi. It meant the world to me. It was where most of my friends were. It was where I had the most engaging activities, where I learned a lot, where I grew a lot. And I wish that could happen. Maybe this is not the generation for it, but that was something I missed.
Well, it's interesting. I remember being active in USY myself when I was a child, but when I was president, I remember being on a president's board and grappling with the realization that one of the things we struggled with here as a congregation with USY is that they were not accepting of interfaith families, which is something that we have been accepting of. And so sometimes the ability to sustain that sort of youth group was not aligning ideologically with where we were.
You raise that. That's one of the things that made Beth-El different from the rest of the conservative movement. I was once taken to task nationally by the rabbinic leadership of the conservative movement. I'm sorry? Yeah, it involved both of us. A letter was written to the then president of the board of directors of the synagogue that the rabbis Sasso should be sanctioned because of something they said. And what is it that they said? That they would be willing to counsel and prepare for, to counsel premaritally interfaith couples, and that they would be willing to say a few words, personal words on their behalf, not as the part of the formal wedding ceremony, which is still prohibited by the conservative movement, and we as a conservative congregation do respect the standards which the national movement has. But because Sandy and I spoke saying that we have to stop this attitude of exclusion and limitation and segregation of interfaith families in our movement. Congregation Beth-El Tzedek has always been in the forefront of conservative affiliated congregations in the way that it integrates interfaith families into the community, and in the engagement of those who are Jews by choice into our congregation, of whom we are very proud and very grateful.
Good. I want to switch roles a little bit and talk about the two of you as both rabbis and parents. Everyone here has grown up knowing that David and Debbie are your children, and they were raised here at Beth-El Tzedek. Something perhaps I didn't appreciate as a child, because I'm not that much older than your own children, is how you juggled it all. So I want you to talk a little bit about I was struck a little bit, Rabbi Sandy, you said that for 10 years you really didn't want to be known, you didn't talk about being a woman rabbi, you didn't want to be known as a woman rabbi, yet you were still kind of tasked with traditional roles of motherhood and being a wife and those sorts of things. I want you to talk a little bit about how you juggled your responsibilities to the congregation and also as parents and spouses.
As well as we could. Look, I didn't mean I didn't mind being a woman rabbi. I was proud of that. I didn't want to talk about Judaism and feminism from the pulpit at the beginning because I wanted people to first sort of like me as a rabbi before I got into what some of my concerns were about women in Judaism. So that, but you know, people ask that all the time, and I never have a good answer. I just don't. You know, we did not divide the tasks at home, like, okay, you know, you'll do the dishes, I'll cook the dinner. I mean, we never did that. Everything just sort of happened. And we took it a little bit at a time. One thing I did do, and many of you may not remember this, but when I came here, David was a year old, and a couple years later, I had Debbie. For the first few years of the congregation, I worked part-time. I knew that I wanted to spend time at home with the children, I wanted to be more present in their lives, and I knew a full-time congregational position would be difficult. So we worked out a part-time arrangement. When the kids started going to school full-time, I realized I was working full-time because I had the time to be here. And I remember saying to the board, you know, we have to negotiate a full-time contract. And they said, well, you are full-time, aren't you? I said, yes, but I am not being paid full-time. So we revised that. You know, I just heard an author speak recently who was asked, how do you make balance in your life? And she says, there is no balance. And I resonated with that because there is no balance. I mean, there are days when you give your all to your work because you have to and you need to be there, and there are days where you give your all to your family and it's never balanced. You just sort of keep working at it. And the truth is that we did have each other. And even though Dennis grew up in a fairly traditional Panamanian family where roles of men and women were clearly defined, I could tell you more about that. But he didn't follow that. I mean, he didn't follow it. He shared in household responsibilities. I think I bore the brunt of it, however, no. But we really did share our experiences. If we could both give sermons, then we could both wash the dishes. You know, there wasn't that clear definition. And you know what? I always say you'll just have to ask my kids if it worked or it didn't work. But seeing how they've grown and what they've accomplished in their lives and their own families, I think it worked.
They're pretty extraordinary. I'm only going to ask 2 more questions because I want to give time for other people to stand up and ask questions of the 2 of you. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the last few years because I think that has put a different take on Judaism and a different stressor on all of us as a result of the pandemic. It's really been difficult for people in ways we may not have imagined. And what do you feel best prepared you to deal with the shifting world of the pandemic and meet the congregational needs? And what surprised you the most?
I don't think any of us was prepared for what happened. And we didn't have a course in rabbinical seminary, Pandemic 101. We didn't have a course in rabbinical seminary that said, you know, when this catastrophe happens, this is what you do. When this other thing happens, this is what you do. You just roll with the punches. The good thing for me as a rabbi is that I had the Beth-El staff, and we could all together respond to this, hitting the ground running. We had just hired, and I'm not going to single out individuals here, but we had just hired Jackie Goldstein as our programming and marketing director. And Jackie was amazingly talented at virtual communications, and she was the person who allowed us to immediately get out in the community when we could not see the people. With the help of Shari and with the help of my rabbinic and colleague at the time, and Cantor Melissa and George and the staff, we just started having strategic planning meetings. And we said, Beth-El is not going to remain dormant during this period. We're going to use it as an opportunity to reach out to the congregation and stay in touch with the community and be there for simchas and be there for difficulties. There are some things that we could not do because nobody could do it. Couldn't visit people in nursing homes, but we found ways around that. And what made it possible and what made it successful is that we had a very understanding and cooperative congregation. So it was just a confluence of personnel, a confluence of circumstances. I think we all realized that we are going through something that we are all walking with blinders through. We'll take a peek every once in a while and see how it's working. I remember the first pandemic service that Cantor Melissa and I did sitting in the chapel. It wasn't even viral. It was just, how do you call that technology? YouTube. No, it was FaceTime. It was, okay, video, whatever. So we sat there the day before, and I said to Melissa, okay, how are we going to do this? We're not going to make it as long as a regular Shabbat evening service because people are not going to pay attention. We have to make it short enough, sweet enough, meaningful enough that they will want to reconnect again next week. So we sat down, and in a matter of half an hour, we drafted a service. We sat there on 2 chairs in the chapel, if you will remember, and we delivered what we called our first pandemic Shabbat experience and invited everybody to stay connected. We said social distancing will not cause us to be spiritually disconnected. And we just rolled with the punches, and we went. And I think we certainly could have done more, but I think what we have done has enabled the congregation to not only maintain itself, we have grown in membership. We have had a lot of new families that have joined, new individuals. We have had people taking courses by Zoom that would never have set foot in the synagogue to take them during that period. So in so many ways, we became a synagogue without walls, Judaism without boundaries, still maintaining the essence of who we are, but sharing it with whoever wanted and making ourselves available.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, I was only involved by hearing Dennis talk about all the problems, but Friday night services, we had more people than we've ever had from Friday night services when we were online. I go, oh my God, look, it's just like 100 people, 200 people from across the country. I mean, it was
100 Zooms.
Yeah, it was extraordinary.
Which means multiple people. So.
But the only thing I want to say is, as much as Dennis hates technology, and you all know he hates technology, if we didn't have that technology, we could never have done what happened, and we would have been truly isolated. You think of other times of plague when they didn't have the ability to connect that we have the ability to connect, even on, with FaceTime and things like that. I can't even imagine how painful that time would be. At least, you could stick up the computer on your dining table and have your whole family have Passover with you. So, So you give credit, just a little credit to technology, and then I'll give a lot of credit to the very hard work that Dennis did during this time. Everybody, but I lived with him, so, But I don't think you understand the emotional toll it takes to try to be there for people when you can't be physically present. And there were lots of tragedies and lots of deaths and lots of illnesses. And I will say this because I love you and because it's true, Dennis did an extraordinary, extraordinary job. He was there for everybody. And okay, what else should I say? Oh, there's one thing. I'll say this separately since I got a little mushy. I don't know how all you got engaged, but I'm going to tell you this little story about how we got engaged because this relates to what I just said. We were studying the book of Jeremiah. Anybody want to try to better that one? We were studying the book of Jeremiah and in a little den in my home, and he asked me to marry him. And it so happened that, thank God, there was a good verse in the book of Jeremiah that we were studying that we could put inside our wedding rings. And the verse, not all of Jeremiah is so nice, he's a pretty, the yelling at the people for sinning all the time. But there was a verse that said, Ahavat olam ahavtik. I have loved you with an eternal love. And that's still inside our wedding bands. And that was not some fancy engagement, but it was a very special moment for the two of us. Okay, say something nice about me now. No.
Yeah.
I'm always saying nice things about you.
We don't have time for a lot more questions, so I'm going to ask one that I wanted to know. Sandy, since you retired in 2013, you have been taking your life in many new directions. You have continued to evolve as a storyteller. You've been active in the civic and interfaith community. You have founded Women for Change. Dennis, what do you envision as your next chapter?
Yeah, Dennis. No.
I have a beautiful, lovely wife that loves me and will, just ask me what I want to do the next day and will take care of it.
I'm going to be interested to find out how Sandy feels about having you home all the time.
That is a good question. I actually like to get out of the house. I don't know if you realize that. I do very little work. My sermons are for the most. That was one of the difficult things about the pandemic, because most of my sermons, most of the stuff that I write in the back booth of a restaurant. I like to sit down in a I need a little bit of activity, noise around me. Don't like to work in isolation. And part of the problem with the pandemic is that I could not get out and do some of the things that I was accustomed to do to be productive, right? But you learn new ways. And Sandy, I should say that given what we had to do during the pandemic, I couldn't have done it without Sandy's support and ideas and encouragement. I mean, she does not only make my life, but my rabbinate so much more meaningful and deeper. So, what was the question? What do I want? I have no idea. I don't have any prescription, and I don't have any plans. I have a lot of cleanup to do. I have a lot of files that I need to go through. I have a lot of things that I have written that I want to revisit. Ideally, I would like to put together some things for further editing and hopefully eventually the publication. But right now, it's open. I need to just step back a little bit when the summer comes.
Good. Well, we have just a few more minutes, so I know Todd and Rob are going to give people in our audience an opportunity to ask questions as well.
Just a reminder, family services is starting 5:30, but I think that rabbis will stick around and answer questions. We can go over our time limit if you're okay with that. You have anywhere to be? No reservations for meals right now? Okay. Questions?
Not till 6:30.
Anyone have a question?
Coffee,
All right, I'll start off with a question then. Oh, here, wait, we got one over here.
Comments, but only if they're nice.
When you ask questions, please stand up and then introduce yourself.
Ari Hodes, my mom works here. Rabbi, and Rabbi Dennis and Sandy have always been my rabbis. Can't imagine the synagogue without them. So besides this wonderful synagogue and you guys yourselves, what else do you think specifically you could say about Indianapolis here and about our community that should be especially attractive to Jewish people who, you know, might be interested in moving or looking for a new place?
Hey, that's an opportunity. That's an idea for a future job, being a marketer for Indianapolis. Thank you, Ari. I think that Indianapolis is a very congenial community. It is a place where people can come, and if they make the necessary effort that everybody who comes into a new community needs to make, very readily feel accepted, involved, incorporated. There are great cultural opportunities in the city, wonderful universities. There are civic and all types of opportunities for people to come. And the Jewish community is a growing Jewish community. It's a diversifying Jewish community. I think that 15, 20 years from now, the community will be, in terms of its structures and institutions, a bit more diversified than we see it right now. But the important thing is that the diversification should not lead to separation. So, yes, I would very highly recommend people to come to this city. I think that certain people of a certain Jewish mindset and orientation who've grown up in certain East Coast communities or perhaps West Coast may find it difficult to integrate into the pace of life of Indianapolis and to the nature of Jewish communal life in Indianapolis. I, for myself, like it. I lived in New York for 3 years, and I don't miss anything of it, other than going back with the confirmation class from time to time. The bakeries, perhaps.
Okay, I want to say one thing. Look, I want you to look at the landscape of Indiana and recognize how much the Jewish community has shaped this city and this state. I mean, I don't think it's hard to think and grasp. I was just at an Indiana Humanities Board meeting in Bloomington, and I couldn't, and there was a discussion about how many of the buildings at Bloomington actually came to be. And at the end, the person giving this lecture was not Jewish. At the end, I said, well, this was all Jewish. And he said, yes, the Jewish community has impacted from the law school to the art museum to the hospitals. I mean, yes, well, of course, that's why I mentioned the law school. And I mean, the hospitals, I mean, every time somebody wants to know about a doctor, I said, oh, well, the expert, the best one is in Indianapolis. My cousin now calls me and says, do you have the best doctor for this disease? I said, yes, we have the best doctor. I mean, this community is so rich in talent and generosity to the general community that we should be very proud of that, and that we need to continue that. So I say come despite some of the politics.
We have a lot of questions forming in the audience.
My name is Greg Silver, and I wanted to comment that the Jewish program, Bourne's Jewish Studies, and what Robert and members of our congregation may he rest in peace today,
Yep.
and Sandra have done for Indiana. I wanted, one of the things that
By
you...
the way, Greg, before you continue, just during the afternoon break, I don't know if she's here now, the granddaughter of Bob and Sandra Borns, who is now a teacher here in Indianapolis with Teach America, stopped by. She's the daughter of Betsy Borns, and we have now connected her to the synagogue where her great-grandfather, Irving Borns, was the leader of the Daily Minyan. And 4 generations back, she is now connecting with our synagogue.
We've had a great effect on Indiana. One of the things that I think you and both have done for the community that you didn't mention were your op-ed pieces in the paper. You've given us an awareness of to the community beyond us of some things that are very important, and I hope you'll continue that. When you were speaking, I thought about something you did for Congressman Jacobs when he was dying. He had been reading your columns, and as a devout Catholic, he loves what you wrote, and I remember in his last days that he asked to speak to you, and you did. And I think that he was at peace after he had so many times asked me to get you to speak to him. That was great. Now, my last question is, address your family upbringing. How did it affect, or did it affect why you are where you are today and how you succeeded in life? Your parents, of course, I knew your father, but what about your parents?
Okay, Todd is saying wrap it up.
No, just answers be less sermon-like and well, there's so many people who are signaling that they want to ask questions. I want to make sure we have time to get through all the questions.
Well, how about we just say, listen, I think, well, you can add, Dennis, but we both had great families. I mean, they supported us. They were delighted in what we chose to do, and they were just kind and loving people. I mean, it wasn't anything academically that they taught us. It was the way they modeled their lives as 2 loving people who loved their family above all else that influenced the way, we interact with other people.
Same. I was an only child. I was not a pampered child, and I was actually held up to a behavioral discipline. But my mother and my father were totally vested in my upbringing, my welfare, my education. They took a great deal of joy and pride in whatever I accomplished. My mother was my marketing agent in Panama, even decades after I had left the city. So it was a very supportive, loving, and multi-generational family with a strong sense of historic awareness about who we are and where we came from as Sephardic lineage, Jewish lineage. Yes.
Jeff Greenberg. So I just want to make a comment, then I'll ask a question. But both Nancy and I grew up in very traditional conservative synagogues, one in New York City, me in New York City and she in Chicago. Neither of us had rabbis that I would consider approachable or friendly. And what you did for our kids by being approachable and friendly, it was just tremendous. No, that has been something that we've always spoke positively about our membership in this congregation. So thank you for that. The question I have is, what advice do you have for the person that's going to succeed you leading our congregation?
The person who's going to succeed us?
Yeah.
This sounds like there could be a book.
That's a difficult question, Jeff, because I think that every rabbi has to model his own path into the rabbinate. The best advice that I would give is the most important Hebrew affirmation: Shema. Listen. Don't come and try to do things and shape the congregation in your image right away. get to learn the congregation, get to understand the congregation, get the congregation to know you and to like you, and then you can grow together. And so the rabbinate is as much a servanthood as it is a leadership. And my advice to any rabbi anywhere, and certainly whoever would follow here, is to be aware of who the congregation is, learn the history, and honor the history of the congregation and the example of those who came before. It was very important for Sandy and me to learn about Bill Greenfeld and Sidney Steinman and Milton Steinberg, because through them, this congregation was built. But at the same time, they worked with people. And a congregation is a gathering of people, a gathering of Jews. So the role of the rabbi is to be there as a mediator, as an exemplar, as a teacher, and when the opportunity arises, to provide leadership for which you will have been empowered because you have been a good listener and a servant.
That sounds good to me. No, I really feel the same way. In some way, the next rabbi is a descendant of many great leaders that have served this congregation and have made it what it is. And so recognizing that is so important. But that person is also an ancestor for the next generation. And they're going to build something different and new, even as, they respect the past. And so if you can hold those two in tension, I think that the person will serve this congregation well. And also, I would say, you have to love what you do. This is not just a job. You have to love what you do and have to like the people you do it for. So that's something that every rabbi who is successful in a community has to have. The love of what they're doing and the love of the people they're doing it with, not just for, but with.
I thought some of what Sandy Rothbaum, I thought some of what you said today was interesting and something that I sort of didn't quite understand about Reconstructionist Judaism before you elaborated on it.
Can you hold that closer to your mouth, please?
Oh, okay. That it's about an evolving kind of Judaism where you sort of figure out what it is about Judaism that's important to bring people in and make them want to have a common experience in terms of their lives. And also you talked about it's very hard to get young people to come to the organizations that exist, during the high school years or maybe even the earlier years. And we've been involved a little bit with what's going on at Indiana University, where people are coming in droves from the East and the West Coast to Indiana. There's some element of what's going on there that is drawing people Jewishly into that arena. And if Judaism is going to bring young people in and be there for the future, in high school, everybody's got the music lessons and the sports events and stuff, but in college, all of a sudden, you have more time, and people are finding more time to get involved Jewishly. It seems to me that some of the people who are supporting Indiana University and maybe might want to focus on some of the Jewish aspects of getting together, and some of what's going on here to move into that arena is an opportunity that's going on in Judaism today, very much in the vein of what you've brought to Beth-El Zedek, to make us feel happy in our Judaism and our children happy in their Judaism, to where they want to go on to something that's meaningful to them and to know more about what's going on in the world. Anyway, so I appreciate what you've said. I'm thrilled to have been part of your congregation during the time that you've been here and the intellectual experience you bring to what you do. So thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Yeah, I would add this. Invest resources in Jewish living. Give your treasure as we give time and talent to the development of Jewish institutions, programs, activities that will attract young people. Even as we invest in the broader community, in the arts and in the sciences and in everything, because it's important to do that, to have a presence in the general community, let us not forget that it is for us to build the foundations of the future of Judaism. And if we don't have the programs, if we don't have the institutions, if we don't have the opportunities, if we don't have the training of the leadership that will make the Jewish people strong and vibrant, it ain't gonna happen. So my word to all of you is give of yourselves fully to make Jewish life the best that it can be.
Can I say something else? The stronger the Jewish community and the stronger congregations are, the stronger your rabbis will be. There are young people deciding what careers they want to go into. You want the best and the brightest and the most creative to become rabbis. But they're only going to do that if they see opportunities for them and their lifelong career, in the Jewish community. So it's so important to make that happen. And just one example, look, we have to take some risks. We wouldn't have an early childhood program if you didn't take a risk with 8 kids in a building. And now many of those kids not only graduated, but belong to the congregation. We married them, So sometimes we have to experiment a little bit. Some things won't work, but some things might. And hopefully there will be people to generate these new ideas, just as when we came, we were full of new ideas. And we had the support of this community to make them happen.
Anyone?
Any other questions?
I thought that was a...
I do have a question, though. I'd like to, because I've had the privilege of working with you and seeing a little bit more of what the day-to-day life of a rabbi is like. I find it to be, I think it's one of the hardest jobs. And taking outside the pandemic, it already puts a strain on everybody's life and adds some depression to it. You're dealing with everybody's sorrows all the time and comforting people. What are some of the techniques you use to relieve some of that stress that puts on your life when you're helping all of these other people?
That's good.
Well, the most important thing is to have a supportive partner, if possible, a supportive family, and a supportive circle of friends. And then to have an understanding of yourself and of the work that you do, as Sandy said, that is different, and that is, let me use a religious term here, that is salvific, meaning that it saves you, it makes you feel fulfilled in being a person and in what you do. I think that unless you come into the rabbinate, as well as many other service professions, but as a rabbi I can speak from my experience, unless you believe that what you are doing is meaningful, there are too many exit doors. And a lot of people have left the rabbinate over the past couple of years. Some because of congregations folding and whatever happening, but some because they were already at a stage close to retirement, and with the onset of the pandemic, they said, "That's it, I'm leaving." So a lot of rabbis have left early because of the pandemic. I just was approached after services by somebody, I'll keep it anonymous, who said, "Rabbi, I don't know if you will remember, but I asked you many years ago when I was going through a hard time, what is the most important what is the most important part about being a human being? And he said, do you remember what you said? I said, no, I don't remember. Tell me what I said. And he says, you told me that I can make a difference. And that is, I think, unless you go into the rabbinate with the conviction that you can make a difference, it ain't gonna matter. So, and I think we can all say that about our lives and about our careers and about our relationships. Be convinced that you have something that you can share or give or teach or do that will make a difference.
Debbie, any questions?
I don't think I have any questions. I feel like I've heard many of your stories so far. But I don't know. I mean, I hope that people are in as much awe of what you have accomplished as I am as one of your children. I've gotten to see it, you know, up close in a way that other people haven't. I know that you haven't had a day off since you started, that you're always on call, that you're there, you will never not be by someone's side when they need you, and yet you can do that for other people and still always make your family feel like you're always there for us too. So I love you very much. I'm very proud of you.
Love you.
I think that's a perfect way to end this wonderful session, to hear from your daughter what all of us feel on how that you give your all the time. And thank you for that. Thank you for Rebecca.
Thanks for what you have given us.
Thank you, Rebecca, for hosting us. And Rabbis Dennis and Sandy, don't go too far. We have a lot more time to celebrate your years in the rabbinate.
I'm gonna single out one person who is here, because he comes every High Holy Day and sits in the same place, and that is Beth-El Khan, who is celebrating 99 years of age. And we love to see her when she is here. Earlier, she was sitting next to Lee Shevitz. I don't know if Lee is here now. Lee is 95. She's going to be 96. So you know what gives meaning to the rabbinate? Having relationships and knowing people like this. Thank you.
Thank you.